Welcome to Smacky's Garage. Today, we're going to be talking about the things that you need to check when you get a new project. As you know, on this channel, we got a new project. And with that project comes a lot of work and a lot of trying to figure out what the previous owner did to make sure that things are safe, to know where to start. So let's get into it. Now, if you're like me, you're probably going to want to just jump in and start working on the car. And when you do that, one of the things you're going to notice is you might not know how everything works or how everything comes together. You'll figure you'll learn it all as you go along. One of the biggest benefits that I've had kind of working on these vehicles is if you spend some time up front to get to know how different systems work, such as the braking system, such as the electrical system, it's going to benefit you a lot in the long run. You know, if you're building a kit like this kit back here, one of the things you want to make sure that you do is you understand how each one of the systems works and how it all plays together. Now, the next thing that's really important to do is you want to check the previous owner's work. So, most likely the car that you bought is not brand new, and since it's not brand new, there's a good chance that someone has done work to it in the past and modified it. You want to make sure that you know what they did. You want to go through the car and check some of the critical systems. When I look at it, I like to go for the critical components on the suspension. I like to go bolt by bolt. Are bolts tightened down? Are they torqued correctly? Or is something loose and that I'm not seeing? So on all the bolts, I'm actually going ahead and I'm marking them with the plus or a T if I've torqued them. I do that on Sharpie on all of them just to make sure that they're all torqued down and that I didn't miss any. So I've done these so far. I've done the ones all the way up front on the steering rack. You can see all marked just to make sure that I know that I've got them. I like to look at all the main chassis bolts. You know, one of the things I noticed on this is the chassis bolts are actually loose that hold the rear of the transmission on. So I'm gonna have to go find the torque specs on those. Those chassis bolts down there are also loose. 1 and 2, so those need to be taken apart and torqued. Those are done. The suspension bolt over here. The suspension bolt on the right rear is loose, so I need to take care of that. That needs to be riveted in place. So a lot of work to do. I like to look at the engine mounts to make sure that they're both in good condition. I like to look at the lug nuts to make sure that all the lug nuts are there, because if they're not, I mean, the car's still gonna roll, but there's a chance you're gonna lose a tire or wheel on the road. And then you want to check some of the body work. On the kit car, what I found is, you know, a lot of the suspension bolts were loose. There was only 3 lug nuts on each wheel, which is something very common while working on cars. If you're going to pick up a project that's half done, you're going to be picking it up in the middle of someone's work. You don't know exactly where they stopped. They might not even remember where they stopped. But it's really important that you go through and you check these systems. Suspension, the main chassis bolts, engine mounts, the lug nuts. After that, I like to go through the brake system. Now, the brake system is going to be critically important for stopping. What you want to do is you want to go through and inspect the lines pretty much from front to back. I like to take a look, make sure nothing is rubbing, nothing is wearing out, because one of the things you might see is this brake line rubbing against part of the body, and it could be wearing over time. Maybe something's a little crusty, rusty, and it's about to fall apart. Maybe you can poke a hole in with a screwdriver. If that's true, then you probably want to get that replaced before it bursts on you. What I like to do is I like to check the manual parking brake, which is important for inspections and registrations out here, and then the normal brakes. Make sure that there's enough pad left. Make sure that the pedal doesn't feel soft. Make sure there's no air in the system. I don't go ahead and bleed the brakes every time, but on the vehicle behind me, we will. Now for the brake lines, I like to follow them front to back so we can see brake lines up here, service loops. That needs to be bolted down somewhere, and then it's going to go underneath the chassis, so I gotta lift it up. I gotta pull that panel out, and they're gonna go here. You can see it's not in. There's a Cleco there. We have an adapter here all the way to the back. Let's look at the right rear. Brake line is attached. Goes through okay. Mounted the chassis. Look at the left rear. See a hole. There's the brake line down there. So you can see the brake line isn't actually attached. So good thing that I'm running through and checking this. So if those are unattached, I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to have to bleed the car. Next, I really like to check and change a lot of the fluids. So when a previous owner is done with the project, you never know the state of the fluids that are in the vehicle. I mean, they could be new, they could be old. The previous owner might say they've changed it in the last time that they've actually worked on the car. But you don't know how old that is. You know, it's worth the $50, $100 to change out the critical fluids. I like to do the engine fluid, the transmission fluid. I'll inspect the brake fluid, but other than that, check them, change them. Better safe than sorry. So one of the other things I like to check on my vehicles is, are they leaking fluid? If it's one of my vehicles, most likely there's going to be some fluid on the ground. And if there's no fluid on the ground, then there probably isn't any fluid in the vehicle. I think under this, you can see it's pretty clean, but my guess is there's probably no fluid in it. We're gonna have to check that. There is pretty much nothing in this. So with an engine that hasn't had fluid in probably a long time, probably gonna wanna turn it over by hand and check to make sure everything's moving smoothly before I try to fire it up so I don't cause any damage. After we do that, kind of what I want to walk through is, I want to walk through the car and I want to make sure that none of the wiring is hitting the exhaust. So we have the oxygen sensors here, which are fine. You know, we have the exhaust manifold over here. I like to look down it, just make sure that there's nothing hitting, nothing going to cause a problem, nothing going to burn and melt on me. Spark plugs, plenty of space. Looks like we're good for the wiring. Then one of the last things that I like to do, so I like to create a to-do list. Now this to-do list is going to be a full list that's going to tell me everything that I need to do before I take and I run and drive the car. So to drive it, I have to get this list done. To get it on the road, and to finish it, to drive it on the road, I have to get that list done. Thanks for tuning in to Smackie's Garage this week. Don't forget to tune in. Next week we're going to start tearing apart the GTM and we're going to try to get the brake system done. See you next week.